Views expressed during Impact Café are those of the panelists and do not represent the views of Franklin Energy or AM Conservation Group.
Welcome again to Impact Café, a podcast from Franklin Energy and the AM Conservation Group. Our latest installment takes on what I think of as perhaps the biggest challenge of the transition to net zero carbon energy networks. That's the decarbonization of buildings. Our built landscape in the U.S. accounts for something like 40% of all carbon emissions. Today's podcast discussion gets after what's working and what's not in this space. Our panel includes Michelle Thomas of SoCal Edison, Donovan Gordon of NYSERDA, and Amy Cortez of the New Building Institute. The moderator is Marissa Yuchin, Chief Commercial Officer at Franklin Energy, and our host is Jim Maddy, CEO of Franklin Energy and the AM Conservation Group. Enjoy the conversation.
So I think we'll get going here. Hi, I'm Jim Maddy. I'm the CEO of Franklin Energy and AM Conservation Group, and thanks for joining us in another installment of the Impact Cafe. Today's discussion will be about building decarbonization. I want to outline, a little bit of the challenge with building decarbonization as I see it. I believe it will be our toughest challenge to get to a net zero energy goal at either a state, local, or national level. As we all know, about 40% of our carbon emissions come from this sector of our economy. Our building landscape crosses jurisdictions, crosses climates, crosses hundreds of utilities, regulators, industry groups, and trade allies, which makes the problem obviously all the more complex. On top of all that is the expanding risk of extreme weather and events like Texas, unfortunately, in the last couple of weeks, and the California wildfires from last fall. So to get at a challenge of this magnitude, we need diverse ideas and thinking, and we are very pleased to have a great panel with a great amount of experience on this topic to lead the discussion. I'll turn it over to Marissa Yuchin, who's the Chief Commercial Officer of our team here at Franklin. So thank you all and have a great discussion.
Thanks, Jim. Indeed, we do have a great panel assembled here today. We're joined by Donovan Gordon, Michelle Thomas, and Amy Cortez. I'll provide a brief introduction on each of them, and then we will get right to it because I think that we've got a lot to talk about, and this hour is going to go by very quickly. So Donovan Gordon is the Director of Clean Heating and Cooling at NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. He is charged with conceptualizing, driving, and implementing a portfolio of products and programs and solutions to encourage and enable customers and partners to invest in low carbon, clean heating and cooling systems. Michelle joins us as the Principal Manager for Building Electrification at Southern California Edison. In her building electrification role, she's responsible for supporting Southern California Edison's Pathway 2045 strategic initiative, which calls for using electricity to power up to 3/4 of space and water heating in buildings. And Amy Cortez is Director of Programs at the New Buildings Institute, where she's responsible for managing implementation teams covering all aspects of NBI's work. And she's been involved in sustainable design, consulting, and implementation of energy efficiency market transformation for over 20 years. I think each of our panelists bring many years of experience. So just for the audience, remember, there is a way to submit questions. I'll encourage you to do that throughout, and we will check it during the course of the conversation and make sure we get to as many as we can. So with that, let's kick off, and I'm going to send the first question over to Amy. So Amy, you benefit from working at a national level, and so cross-pollinating best practices across policy and programs. What are some examples of successful policy and programs that you believe are helping to really move the needle on building decarbonization?
First off, thank you for having me. So good question. We've seen some interesting programs and policies that are really starting to get at decarbonization. codes and, decarb in buildings really comprised of like 5 major elements. We think of efficiency, renewable energy, grid harmonization, electrification, and then embodied carbon, which, is not necessarily in the scope of the utility world. But one program that we think makes a lot of difference are code programs. Codes, utilities and market transformation organizations have been involved in code development and code training activities that have really made a big difference towards rapid improvements in efficiency. And, I can remember seeing a Pacific Gas and Electric slide where 50% of the savings came from their code programs, but only 3% of the budget was used on their code programs. So we think that those are really helping to move the needle where they exist. We also think that we see a number of utilities creating net zero energy programs. And these aim for deep reductions in new and major modernizations, where these new construction programs can be tied with renewable energy programs where possible to really achieve zero energy. And what we've seen be successful is looking at whole building energy savings rather than like one measure at a time. And pairing these with incentives for early target setting, early energy modeling, and maybe bonus incentives when they actually achieve the results. So pairing this with a robust educational training program helps. NBI and the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy are currently facilitating a cohort of utilities that are, so if folks are interested, they can certainly be in touch about programs. On the policy side, there are lots of different policies that are out there. Some policies are, outright gas bans in new construction. We see some of those policies going into play. And others are electrification preferences, where you just meet code if you're all electric, but you have to do better than code if you're dual fuel. And then the other one I just want to mention quickly are building performance standards. I think the existing building stock is a huge part of what needs to be addressed in decarbonization. And we do see a number of jurisdictions, whether it's state or local jurisdictions, putting together regulations for existing building performance. Some of them are energy, some of them are carbon. There's kind of a smattering. Some go into effect right away, some are going to be a little bit longer. But I think building performance standards are definitely one of the policies that has the potential to move the needle.
Excellent. That's great. A little bit of echo there. Sorry about that. So Michelle, let's ask about the notion of building electrification and building decarbonization. How do you think about the difference between the two? And is Southern California Edison focusing on one over the other?
So great question, and thank you for having me. And so you kind of kicked off my introduction talking about SCE's Pathway 2045, which is our decarbonization strategic vision. And so what that does, just to give people a little bit more background, is it examines the energy implications of California's longer term decarbonization goals on both the economy side and the electric sector. And it maps out sort of a feasible path and low cost path forward in order to meet these goals. And so Pathway 2045 concludes that the changes required across California's economy are very significant, and that decarbonization will need to be achieved through a combination of tactics. So it's not obviously all building electrification, but it includes powering 100% of retail sales with carbon-free electricity, of course, electrifying transportation, but it also includes using low carbon fuels for technologies that are not viable for electrification. So I just kind of want to, set that record straight. GHG emissions from the commercial and residential sectors are dominated today by natural gas for home and commercial use. So for space, heating, cooking, hot water, and buildings are responsible for 12% of California's overall emissions. So looking roughly at an example, building electrification today reduces total GHG emissions in single family homes by roughly 20 to 36% relative to natural gas fueled homes. But as electricity gets cleaner, these reductions are estimated to increase to almost 90% by 2050. So that's very significant. But specific to SCE's approach to building electrification, again, you mentioned this in the intro, our analysis has identified the need for 3/4 of space and water heating to be electric by 2045, so roughly 70%. And with that, we see that customers will benefit from significant energy efficiency provided by heat pumps because they're 3 to 4 times more efficient than their gas counterparts, as well as demand response programs that can help to lower customer consumption and bills. And so while we're not pursuing a mandate in California for all buildings to stop using natural gas today, we do think it's important to focus on early action and acceleration of the electrification market. So that's kind of our approach today.
Excellent. That's great. So Donovan, thinking about NYSERDA's role here. So New York has set very ambitious decarbonization goals. And we know that utility programs are an important channel for achieving these goals, but it's not the only channel. So what's the role of NYSERDA as it relates to state level decarbonization goals?
Sure. So again, thank you for having me as well. It's a pleasure to be here. Last year, we launched what we call the New York State Clean Heat Program, and it's basically a utility program and a new NYSERDA supported program. So these utilities have $454 million through 2025 to roll out and administer heat pump incentive programs for ground source, air source, and heat pump water heaters. NYSERDA has allocated $230 million for New York State Clean Heat Market Development Plan. So what we are going to do is support the utilities incentives by helping develop the market through workforce development, marketing, outreach, increase in awareness, doing different community programs, looking at supply chain development, things of that nature. So we're going to be doing over the next 5 years all things to help build the market so we can support the utilities' efforts to incentivize these heat pumps and achieve their goals, which is a total of 3.6 TBTUs of on-site energy reduction through this program.
Got it. Okay, so Amy, you had talked about building codes earlier, and you mentioned PG&E as an example of a utility that runs codes and standards programs. Admittedly, I used to work at PG&E, and so I'm familiar with those programs, but I don't see that many utilities around the country running a program like that. Can you just spend a moment, like what's the flavor of a codes and standards program? How does it work for a utility to pursue that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always, someone who lives in both the codes and a little bit in the utilities world, it's always been confusing to me that more utilities are not involved in code development. It's a huge opportunity for very cost-effective savings. And I think what happens is like the utilities that have been involved, there are the California utilities, also the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance in the 4 states of the Northwest capture significant amounts of savings from codes programs. And typically how they work is once the utility kind of puts a stake in the ground with the regulators and say that they're going to actively use codes as a tool to gain savings, they develop a market transformation model, which is just kind of like how the code, the bumps in code change, the code advancement will change over time and how credit will be attributed to the utilities. So once that model is developed, the utilities can be involved in codes in a number of ways. They can be involved in the development of code, and that happens at the national level in model code development. That happens at the state level because states adopt their own energy codes. And in some jurisdictions, cities can adopt REACH codes and make them mandatory. So there's a variety of different ways in the code development. There's also opportunities for utilities to help with code training. right? When a new code comes on board, the architects and the engineers and the contractors need to know what that code is saying. And so there are training opportunities, and even focusing on building code officials, the folks that work for the cities, you know, that by increasing their awareness of how the code works and making it easier for them to enforce the code is going to mean enforcement is up, and that increases compliance and makes sure that the savings get accrued. So yeah, I mean, you know, in my opinion, it's like there's a lot of cost-effective savings out there, and it's always been a little confusing to me that more utilities haven't kind of participated in the code process.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there are many ways to kind of go about using the code and shaping and influencing. So that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So Michelle, what role does the demand side management, whether it's EE programs or beyond that, play in this transition to electrification?
That's a super important question. So I'll just start with energy efficiency. We see energy efficiency as being inextricably linked to building electrification. I think it's important that as we transition to electric end uses, we maintain that hyper focus on energy efficiency, and I don't expect that to change. Demand response programs, as I mentioned earlier, help to lower customer consumption and bills. But also as our economy, increasingly becomes more dependent on electricity as its primary fuel, we project up to 50% of single-family homes in California will have customer-sided solar. So again, that will play a super important role. Additionally, homes with solar and storage will provide increased load flexibility and resilience, which is also very important in the environment that we're in. Flexibility provided by grid-connected technologies can also reshape a customer's usage profile, which increases benefits to the customer and the grid, and also can lead to additional cost savings. So I think there are huge opportunities for all areas of DSM. But that being said, grid modernization is going to play a critical role, just in order to keep pace, with ensuring interconnectivity and operability of DERs as the grid evolves and as technologies evolve. So I think DSM is not going anywhere. I think it's all connected, and I think it's very important.
So let me double click on that if I could, as it relates to DSM programs. Then, historically, I know we didn't sort of talk in advance of this one, so if you're able to, historically, we think about efficiency programs being very much all the time, everywhere, always on efficiency. When I think about a place like California that is pursuing, to the point you just made, very high penetration, rates of rooftop solar, distributed solar. What does an efficiency program look like when you have time and location-based elements really coming into play? Like, do you have a vision, or does SoCal Edison have a vision for how the programs may evolve, or maybe they're already evolving to accommodate that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think, I mean, that's almost at the policy level. We have our plans to, continue advancing solar and, looking at grid connected technologies, smart heat pump water heaters, but also maintaining, our efficiency programs that just help customers, reduce cost. But I think from a policy level, there are so many moving parts in California, so many different proceedings. The Building Decarb OIR, the Building Decarbonization proceeding that the CPUC opened in 2019, one of the elements that they're looking at is sort of layering, and it's program layering, but it also focuses on incentive layering. So it's a great question, and I don't necessarily have I don't have an answer for that, but I do know that there's a lot of consideration in terms of how all of this is going to actually come together. There's a clean energy finance proceeding that was also just open. There's a market transformation effort. So it's not a neat and packaged answer, but because the space is so fluid right now, that there is a focus on that, and I do think that the policy level plays a big role.
Yeah, so on that, maybe a question for all of you, and that is, each state, I think Michelle just made a really interesting point, and that is, in California, as one example, there are many different regulatory proceedings, many different policies that ideally could coordinate well together to move things forward, but could, work at cross purposes. When you look out at the landscape of states that are working on building decarbonization, in particular, other ones in addition to California, that you look to. I mean, New York's probably a good example, but where else? What are some of the examples you look to around the country for how this is being done well?
Well, with us in New York State, we talk to other states, Massachusetts, California, they are very progressive. We also talk to various organizations like NEA, NEEP, and others, and also I'm talking quite a bit now to the Department of Energy. I think I talked to them maybe twice over the last 4 years and 3 times over the last month. So I'm very encouraged with that. And then a lot of folks are calling me because New York State has the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is the first climate law that legislates these carbon reductions that the governor had as executive orders.
Yeah, and just I'm going to throw credit to Donovan. We actually do look to a lot of what's going on in New York. And it's interesting because when we had our prep call, and Donovan, you were talking about district heat pumps and, the possibility of leveraging existing, gas infrastructure. The first thing I did was reach out to our emerging technologies team to say, hey, let's reach out to New York to have those conversations. So, I think different types of mechanisms for how utilities, leverage opportunities. We've looked at, different states and how they're doing that. But New York is doing a lot of good stuff. So.
Thank you.
I would agree. You have 2 states represented that are leaders. The other one that I would throw out there is Washington State. They just put together a statewide plan that talks about, this transition from energy to considering carbon, and how does that work kind of throughout all the different, how does it work in codes? How does it look in regulatory policy for utilities and in market transformation or whatnot? So.
Great. Well, let's learn a little bit about some of the technology going on there in New York, Donovan, in particular, this recent announcement about district heat pumps. So, I think many of us have a familiarity with this notion of community solar, for example. But here in New York, I think you guys are innovating and thinking about this concept of community heat pumps, or sometimes referred to as community thermal or district thermal. Can you explain what this is and how it works as a building decarbonization approach?
Sure. Very, very excited about this program. It launched a week ago, and proposals are due for our first round on March 9th. So the driving force for this was really finding a way to scale heat pump installations and also reduce costs. So sort of the hypothesis is if we can bundle several buildings together, whether it's homes or larger buildings, a campus, it would lead to the cost reduction in installation of the system. Also, too, I will also say this, I mentioned this earlier, that with our goals for 2050 to basically be carbon neutral, we have 4.5 million buildings in New York State. So literally, when you do the math, over 30 years, we have to basically convert over 400 buildings per day. That's including weekends to hit our goals. So going the one-offs where air source heat pump there or ground source heat pump there, we just really won't get there. So this program is to solicit proposals for what we're calling community systems, and we define a district as 10 or more small residential buildings, or 2 or more buildings, larger buildings that connected that equal 40,000 square feet, which the large building, that's relatively small. What we're seeing, the interests are campuses, college campuses, medical campuses, medical facilities, new construction. That's basically the low-hanging fruit. And we look at different permutations of it. So it could be one large geothermal ground loop, like Ball State or some of the larger geothermal installations. But interestingly, what we're also seeing emerging is in municipalities. The municipalities own water and wastewater utilities, but also on the wastewater side, how about taking a look at using treated, or even raw, but mainly treated sewage as a source and sink, and running that through communities. One of the things that I'm personally hoping for is an infrastructure bill that will give municipalities the resources to upgrade their water mains and their sewers, their roads. So as they tear up their roads to upgrade their infrastructure, laying down thermal infrastructure as well too. So I see that as a wonderful opportunity. So I've already talked to my boss, and we're already looking to see how we can add money to this program, because we realize that $15 million may not be enough.
I agree. I was thinking about that. It is a generous amount, but large projects require large funds. That's really exciting. I mean, very innovative, very different. I think we'll all be closely watching that as a really innovative, different approach. Glad you guys are.
No pressure.
No pressure. Hey, that's why we all are in this space, right? We want to move the needle. We want to move it. We want to move it quickly. We want to move it far. I want to ask Amy your thoughts on this idea of connecting building decarbonization, but also making healthier spaces. And I think we think about decarbonization obviously as having, reducing carbon, but there's so many other benefits for the work that we can be doing in these buildings. So are you seeing this play out either in programs or policies, this notion of bringing in healthier spaces, healthier communities?
Absolutely. When you look across the United States, millions and millions of homes rely on gas appliances, and we know that that's a challenge for decarb and for human health. Especially unvented gas stoves are a big source of indoor pollution, and the scientific evidence is mounting. And we know that certain populations are especially at risk, especially children. We've learned that homes with a gas stove, kids have a 20 to 40% increased chance of having asthma. And then also with lower income populations or Black, Indigenous, or people of color, they're disproportionately impacted and with increased exposure both externally and inside due to maybe smaller homes, older homes, and those are also tied to poor health outcomes. So this research is really getting lots of people interested in how can kind of environmental justice and climate advocates, work together to start addressing the indoor air quality problems that are associated with indoor homes. We're starting to hear talk about regulating the emissions associated with these indoor appliances, which is kind of a new approach at how you address homes. In legislation, we're seeing healthy homes legislation pop up to deal with things like ventilation. The recent wildfires, I'm in Oregon, and the recent wildfires were here too. I couldn't go outside for 10 days. So how does that, how is that addressed, and how can we kind of tie some of these together? Because, decarbonization, it will take money, and we need to start thinking about mutual benefits and ways that we can tie some of these health outcomes and maybe tap some of the funding to improving health to also improve for a climate perspective as well. So, but it's very true that the buildings and decarbonization and health are all very related.
Yeah, you actually went exactly where I was going, which is the funding, right? I mean, energy efficiency programs that we think about often through the utilities, they are being measured on their ability to drive kWh or therm savings. And the actual metrics associated with a healthy home may be very different than that. And so, asking a utility ratepayer to pay for that may not be the right way to go about doing it. So are you seeing any creative approaches of agencies coming together with utility programs or funding that's coming to kind of co-pay for, co-help fund some of these changes in the homes or buildings?
We have seen some Energy Plus Health pilot demonstration projects where, you know, Medicare funds have been used. I might be, anyway, but we have seen health funds being used to deal with, you know, to help embellish the weatherization programs. And so starting to look at evidence-based programs that can achieve dual outputs of better health and lower carbon emissions. So I think, you know, and we have seen a lot more environmental justice organizations start thinking about buildings, you know, that hadn't maybe been on their radar as much before because there are so many other issues, you know, being cited near other industrial facilities or whatnot. But I do think that the opportunity to kind of dovetail these funds and really, you know, lead into a more focused direction that get both health and climate outcomes is something that we're very interested in doing more of.
Actually, if I can add to that, if I may, that's clearly we're looking at that as well too, because we are focused on greenhouse gas reductions because of climate change, quote unquote, save the planet. But one of my big arguments for heat pumps is that it actually impacts indoor air quality, carbon monoxide, and that's what makes people sick and gives you asthma. So, and that's a benefit of a heat pump that's not quantified, factored into the price and the cost of an installation. We're looking at the reductions in the energy savings. We're not looking at the health benefits. And I know in our LMI team, we are doing a pilot called Healthy Homes, where we're looking at the reduction in visits to emergency rooms or the doctor's office because of asthma related to indoor air quality. So we're just starting to figure out how to quantify that, but once you can quantify that, that's going to be huge.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Sorry, just to jump in, it's a really, I mean, it's a huge expense, thousands of dollars for every person with asthma. And if you have a family with multiple members, you know, that it's thousands of dollars a year to treat asthma. So those types of creative programs, I think, are really important to moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really well said. So Donovan, I know that you're focusing on, you know, we've touched on some policy stuff. You guys are focusing on some innovative technologies, but, you know, and I know you work for NYSERDA, which is really kind of a research development organization, but you really do support the goals of the state of New York. So when you think about, aside from kind of the technology, market adoption of technology piece, what are other technical or economic challenges that exist in achieving the state objectives in New York?
Well, you know, I'll start with the economics. The cost of installing clean thermal technology heat pumps is expensive relative to the current system, fossil fuel-based systems. So cost needs to come down, number one, and cost will probably come down through scaling, more demand. We also need new financing mechanisms that make it affordable for folks, or even ownership models where, but what really got solar off the ground was the third-party ownership, the power purchase agreement. So looking at those kinds of options, and really trying to figure out how we address the low to moderate income, because in New York State, actually a little over 50% of New York State residents fall into the LMI category. So affordability is a big issue. So when we think of heat pumps or clean thermal, the affordability aspect comes in, because we don't want it to cost the customer more or significantly more to transition to electrification than the current system. On the technical side, it's not technical as much, but two things that shoot out at me right now. One is a lot of the housing stock is older. So we now have to look at upgrading the electrical box. So that's an added cost that really people haven't thought about before when they think of electrification. So, oh, install a heat pump and you're good. But no, you may have to upgrade your panel, which is another almost $1,500 to the cost. But the biggest issue is really the workforce. We don't have enough trained people to do the work. And when we do our analysis, and this is actually across the country, almost 50% of all contractors, HVAC contractors in particular, are going to be retiring over the next 5 years. So we're going to lose half the workforce. Then we need to attract new folks because we want to convert, again, these 4.5 million buildings. So it's a workforce, training them, and the actual cost of the equipment, I think, are the two biggest challenges right now.
Yeah. So building on that, Michelle, and thinking about, the costs, certainly costs can be driven down through scale. They can be driven down through subsidies, but there can be cases where the actual customer bill can change. I mean, if you think about somebody who's been paying for heating on a natural gas bill, and then they convert over to electric, it can cause the electric bill to go up significantly, and potentially, right, the cost of their overall utility share of wallet going up. So how does Southern California Edison balance increased customer bill costs from electrification, with trying to achieve these greater benefits for GHG reduction?
Yeah, that's a super important question. So we're hyper focused on it, most definitely. It's important to remember that electrification of buildings represents a huge opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, both in the near and the longer term. And it can lead to capital cost savings. It can lead to bill savings. It can also lead to life cycle savings in most circumstances. And I think it's important that, we remember that an additional benefit of electrification is what Amy was just talking about, and that is it provides local air quality benefits. She was talking about indoor. I'm talking about sort of the larger, the larger aspect. But it provides, air quality benefits by reducing combustion of fossil fuels in homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. And so one of the things that Edison was part of, there was a statewide study in 2019 by E3, which I identified the most promising near-term opportunities for cost savings for customers in low-rise residential building through electrification options. And some of the most promising, and I think Donovan touched on it, can be found in all-electric new construction. It's low-hanging fruit. It's a cost-effective approach. It eliminates the need for the gas infrastructure. And then also high-efficiency air source heat pumps in homes where air conditioning can be replaced with heat pumps. So you're replacing a gas furnace and a less efficient air conditioning with a highly efficient heat pump. So there is significant cost savings there. And then the same study modeled bill impacts of heat pumps for space and water heating within our service area across the state, but also in our service area. And overall, the study shows savings in combined electric and gas bills. And so the highly efficient heating cycle associated with HVAC heat pumps, as I mentioned, can drive bill savings, but as well as higher efficiency cooling in the AC units. So that said, these are modeled savings. They're based on parametric runs, and there are many variables that can impact bills, and we know that, and we're very aware. We think rates will have to play an important role in electrification. We think that TOU rates will help support cost-effective building electrification because the electric end uses add load outside of peak hours. And then the other thing I want to touch on, and Donovan touched on a little bit, is that while it's critical to usher in a clean energy economy, it's equally as critical to do so in an equitable way that focuses on vulnerable and disadvantaged communities, just to ensure that everybody has access to affordable, clean energy. So we're very focused on that. We have some programs that we've proposed in our income qualified proceeding that's pending right now, but there are programs within the state that the CPUC is administering that is focused on affordable housing and low income. So we're super focused on it, and we're looking at many opportunities, from rates to just just the effectiveness of the efficiency of heat pumps. But it's looking very promising.
That's great. So then, when we think about, maybe this is a question for all of you. When we think about putting the right metrics in place to try to drive decarbonization, again, a lot of what we're talking about from building decarbonization happens through utility programs. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And we are measuring through kWh and therms. So do we need to think beyond that to truly achieve aggressive goals around decarbonization in buildings?
Yeah, I mean, we in California, obviously we're focused on GHG, and that is a metric that I had mentioned, the building decarbonization proceeding, and that proceeding is very focused on GHG reduction. But some of the vehicles that we can leverage, some of the existing programs and proceedings, they do have different metrics, and they're not necessarily GHG related. So I think being able to focus on carbon reduction. I mean, there are elements of, avoided cost of carbon that is part of the energy efficiency sort of cost effectiveness. But our goals and our, the potential and goals is very much focused on kilowatt hours and therms. The other thing too that I think would help. So in California, we have, through an executive order, a transportation electrification goal of, I think, 5 million electric vehicles on the road by 2035, I believe. We don't have that for building electrification. We have a GHG goal, a carbon neutrality goal, but it hasn't been quantified in buildings, and hopefully that is coming, because there's a lot of work and studies that are being done by the California Energy Commission, working with the CPUC. But I think that would also kind of help structure some of these programs and some of these movements forward that will be focusing on carbon.
Mm-hmm.
And in New York, as I mentioned, our guiding document now is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. We call it climate law. And yes, it does codify in law the carbon reduction goals that the governor set out. But in it, it's also a just transition, making sure that low to moderate income residents are participate in this, both getting the equipment at an affordable price, but also being trained for good paying jobs. So that really encompasses it, and it's not just the carbon reduction goals. We're also developing and creating two roadmaps. One is a building electrification roadmap, and both documents we hope to publish it by third quarter 2021, which will give us policy recommendations to achieve our 2030 goal. So whatever goals we have right now through 2025 in our New York State Clean Heat could be modified based on the findings of this electrification roadmap. We're also developing a carbon neutral roadmap, which has a longer look out to 2050 and a broader look, basically looking at the entire clean energy economy, including transportation, embodied carbon, and things of that nature. So it'll be policy recommendations and the kind of incentives, codes, appliance standards, all these things that we'll be looking at. So the metric is going to be very, very broad. But at the end of the day, what I get asked a lot, and what the governor has expressed, and certainly the state is creating good paying jobs for New York as we transition to this clean energy economy.
Yeah, and I think, you have two states that are leading here, but it's important to say that not all states have greenhouse gas emissions integrated into their regulatory context or even in their state goals. So we do need new metrics in many places. Like some of the, they're already being considered in the cost effectiveness in California. That is not true in other places. It's considered a non-energy benefit, and it may or may not be quantified adequately. So I concur that we do need new metrics. That's one of the reasons why at New Buildings Institute, we try to talk about these 5 foundations of efficiency, where there are metrics for efficiency, there are metrics for grid harmonization, there are metrics for electrification, which would be kind of the carbon metrics, and also for renewables. And like Donovan was saying, you know, we need broader metrics like jobs, health, you know, all these metrics need to work together. And I think in many states, we're stuck in an old regulatory environment that's looking solely at kWh and therms and not really, you know, energy is not carbon, although they're certainly related. And we need to broaden and think more holistically in how we approach codes and policy.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, Amy, I think having, you know, a specific metric around jobs is critical. I mean, that is that's a huge concern. And while, you know, there are studies that, you know, show that, you know, there are, you know, high quality jobs for, you know, clean energy in California, it's not today. And I think, you know, being able to really focus on the impacts it's going to have. I mean, as legislation is being considered, I mean, there are labor unions that are involved that are concerned because there isn't this clean, you know, transition to how are these jobs going to, you know, transition to clean energy? What's going to happen to my pension? I mean, these are real issues that affect real people. So I think that is a great point, having a workforce metric.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't really heard much about that, but I think that makes really good sense. All right, so to our audience, we are getting close towards the end. So if you do have a question, definitely put it in the questions and we will work on answering those. So as I review those, let me tee up another one to this team, which has come in, which is, I think, kind of an interesting one. And so it is, how do you justify decarbonization in states that don't have clean energy sources? Okay, no state is 100% coal, right? So, I mean, there are always going to be some clean energy sources in there, but it's an interesting question of, or maybe, you know, I'm just curious. I thought that was an interesting one that came in.
Yeah, we've looked at that in a couple states where we were wondering whether cities that were, you know, had expressed interest in electrification, you know, we looked at their grid mix, right? Because the carbon intensity of energy use, of electricity use, depends on the condition of the grid at the time that energy is used. And so our initial thought was, well, if there's still a lot of coal or natural gas being used to generate the electricity, is it worth pushing electrification policies at all? And the analyses that we saw was even in those states, the new construction opportunities for electrification really is a slam dunk. It does make sense to build new construction all electric, just from the overall societal cost perspective. There are certainly, you know, so we have looked into it in a number of instances with grid mixes that were fairly high carbon intensive. And to some extent, you know, in the codes world, it still did make a lot of sense to incorporate it. But it is something to consider but the research and again, these are parametric analysis, like Michelle said, but when we do look at it, it does make sense from an overall cost of decarbonization perspective.
You're muted.
Thank you, Donovan. When you think about attacking a monumental challenge like building decarbonization, I mean, Donovan, your stats that you shared earlier are really, you know, about the hundreds of buildings that we would have to retrofit a day between now and 2050. It's huge. So, you know, we've been talking today about policies, programs, technologies, all of these play a role. I'm curious what you each think, clearly no right or wrong answer, but just, you know, of these 3 dimensions, which do you think is contributing the greatest results right now across policies or programs or technologies?
For us,
Oh, no, go ahead, Donovan.
I was going to say for us, right now, what's driving is the incentives, buying down the cost. We're addressing that. And we're really embarking on a consumer awareness initiative to increase the awareness of heat pumps so we can try to create more demand. And also that Con Edison has a gas moratorium in Westchester County, which is really forcing everyone to look at alternatives because there are no new gas hookups. And then the denial of the new pipeline that National Grid was looking for. So we have certain things in place now that's sort of driving folks to look at this alternatives.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I think policy is a big driver. As I mentioned, you know, having sort of those clear, distinct quantitative goals for building electrification, you know, whether it's, you know, units or it's, you know, stock of heat pumps, I think that would really help shape policy. The CPUC is doing a lot of work in that space, and you know, we're really happy about that. But it doesn't all fit smoothly together. As I mentioned, a lot of these proceedings, there's really a great opportunity for them to work together. And again, the CPUC is working on, you know, sort of layering these different programs. But, you know, there are other challenges too. Within the EE, you know, area, there are still significant incentives for gas appliances. So, you know, you've got one proceeding that's looking to electrify, the building decarb proceeding, and then there's energy efficiency, which is, you know, again, energy efficiency is critical to decarbonization, but there's just this, you know, kind of push and pull, and you know, just kind of revisiting things like that, I think would really help. But, you know, talking about workforce training and you know, just accelerating the market, I think is going to be super important. You know, contractors, installers, you know, they're the trusted advisor for homeowners. So when they're about to make, you know, a decision about a piece of equipment that's going to last 10 to 15 years, you want them to be able to make a decision based on all of the information. We've got anecdotal stories of, you know, people that are looking to electrify their homes when they reach out to contractors and ask about heat pump water heaters. They're literally told, don't do it. Why would you do that? It's so expensive. And I don't really know much about that technology. Just go with a gas tankless. And so those are, you know, experiences with people that are in the know and know how to go about this. So I think that education, that investment in, you know, really educating the market is going to be critical.
Yeah, I think of those as market transformation programs in general, right? Whether they're educating, you know, midstream, encouraging manufacturers to come out with products that, you know, that right now there's not 120 volt heat pump water heater on the market. And so a couple years ago, they put together a specification for what that would have to be. And we're seeing manufacturers now rise to the challenge and starting to put these 120 volt products out there. So, you know, comprehensive market transformation programs, I think, really help. But they're certainly not a silver bullet. There's a lot of alignment that needs to happen, like Michelle said. And, you know, you need the codes program, market transformation, traditional DSM, and there does need to be some more alignment around just what is the objective. You know.
Yeah, and I'll add that I guess I'm fortunate in New York that we have some of these things coming together. So we have a law, we have legislation, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which puts goals in place in certain policies. We have regulation through our Department of Public Service and Public Service Commission. It's called New Efficiency New York, which led to our New York State Clean Heat. And we have programs through the incentive programs with utilities and the programs that I'm overseeing with the market development plan. So so we sort of have like a trifecta here of really addressing the carbon goals, but advancing electrification and decarbonization of buildings.
That's great. Well, I know we're getting close to time, and actually some of these responses that you all just shared were perfect as you hit on a few questions that came in. So I think we've anticipated our audience well. There's a question, Donovan. Folks are interested to understand the roadmap that you're putting together that you mentioned. Is that within your department? Does it work cross-functionally with other departments within NYSERDA or across the government? Can you share a little bit about how a organization like yours does that kind of roadmap work?
Sure. So the building electrification roadmap is a lady in energy and environmental analysis group that's leading that. I'm very much involved. We have an advisory group of manufacturers and other stakeholders that offer input. We have analyses done by various consultants, and it is across the departments within NYSERDA. We do engage with DPS to some degree because we are trying to come up with regulatory recommendations. And when you say across departments, our codes department, our new construction department, our LMI energy affordability group, and others to sort of come up with a holistic plan or roadmap to achieve our building electrification goals by 2030. The roadmap for net zero or carbon neutral, that's headed by a gentleman named Greg Hale, and we're looking internally, other agencies and outside stakeholders, because we're looking at building materials, we're looking at transportation. It's a much broader look. So yes, so it's not a siloed effect here or a program. We're looking across departments, across agencies, and across industries as we develop that roadmap.
That's great.
And I'll just chime in. We have a chance to work with Greg on that. So, if I could do a little plug, the NBI did do a building electrification technology roadmap. We call it BETTER. And we actually have a webinar tomorrow about different where gas is used in a variety of different building types and what the technology roadmap is for each of those different technologies. So we've done an analysis of that, and we do have a webinar coming up this week, which will get a little bit of a preview to what's going on with NYSERDA.
That's great. Well, I mean, I think what's been clear about the conversation today, I know we're coming up at the end here of our time, is just the interconnectedness of this work across these many dimensions, whether it's in, government, across so many parts of a utility. I mean, it brings so much together to be able to achieve this. And so there's so much work to be done. It will take us time to get there. I think we've put these goals out there in various states and by utilities, even at the national level, but those years will come, they will tick by quickly and they will come quickly. So the focus on this that all of you are working and dedicating your careers to is really inspiring. And I want to thank you for joining us today and being part of this really important conversation. It's been great.
One final comment, if I may. So as we look to decarbonize our buildings and we're putting heat pumps in there, one thing I do want to say, and particularly to the OEMs that make heat pumps, is that we really need equipment with low global warming potential refrigerants. That is a big issue that needs to be addressed.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. That is a critical part of this as well. Thank you. Great. Well, I know Jim's back with us. I'll turn it back over to you again. Thank you to each of you.
I never left you, Marissa. It was a great discussion and a great job by you, so thank you. And I want to give my thanks to Michelle, Amy, and Donovan for a really, really cool look at all the things going on to decarbonize buildings in the U.S. I think your note at the end, Marissa, was what I would say. Cooperation and coordination is critical to make it happen, and just very excited to have this discussion. In about a day, we'll post a video and audio replay of this so you can put it out on your LinkedIn and get it out into the market and whatever social channels you can. But everybody have a great day, stay safe, and let's go decarbonize some stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Just a reminder, Franklin Energy delivers 100-plus turnkey energy efficiency and grid optimization programs for utility partners across North America. We work alongside our sister company, AM Conservation Group, which manufactures and supplies nearly 300 energy efficiency and water conservation products. We help our energy partners achieve their goals with solutions implemented by more than 1,100 energy professionals. Watch out for our next Impact Cafe podcast to join our ongoing conversation. To make sure you're always a part of the conversation, follow Franklin Energy on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn for our latest updates. See you at the next Impact Cafe.